What if Tywin Lannister died at the Battle of the Green Fork? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The morning mist clings to the waters of the Green Fork as Lord Tywin Lannister sits astride his destrier, surveying the field where he expects to crush the Northern Rebellion before it truly begins. Around him, 20,000 Lannister soldiers arrange themselves in precise formation along the riverbank. Their crimson banners snap in the cool dawn breeze, and their armor gleams despite the grey sky overhead. A rider approaches at a gallop, mud spattering from his horse's hooves. Sir Adam Marbrand reins in beside his Lord Commander, his face grim beneath his helm. My lord, our scouts confirm it. The Stark boy has divided his forces. Tywin turns in his saddle, his green eyes sharp with interest. How many ride south against us? 2,000, my lord. Perhaps less. Mostly foot soldiers and a handful of mounted men. For a moment, Tywin studies the distant tree line where smoke rises from northern cook fires. 2,000 men against his 20,000. The boy shows courage, he thinks, but courage without wisdom breeds only corpses. And the rest of his army? Vanished in the night, my lord. Our outriders lost them somewhere near the Twins. Tywin nods slowly. The strategy becomes clear to him now. Young Robb Stark seeks to delay him here while striking elsewhere with his main force, likely against Jaime at River Run. The plan shows tactical thinking beyond the boy's years, but it also reveals the desperation of his position. Clever, Tywin says, almost to himself. But cleverness without strength is still failure. He remembers standing in this same spot with Jaime 3 years past, when his son was still green and eager for glory. The lesson he taught that day echoes in his mind now. Never underestimate an enemy, father had said. But I'd added my own wisdom. Never overestimate them either. The boy commands a force of farmers and fishermen. They may fight bravely, but bravery breaks against steel and discipline. Sir Adam shifts in his saddle. Your orders, my lord. Tywin studies the field before him. The Green Fork runs swift and deep here, its waters dark with recent rains. On the far bank, thin columns of smoke mark where the northern force has made camp. He can end this quickly, he knows. A single charge across the ford will scatter them like leaves before the wind. Form the men into 3 columns, he commands. Sir Kevan will take the left with the heavy horse. You'll command the right with the crossbowmen and spearmen. I'll lead the centre across the ford. The prisoners, my lord? Any northern lord we take alive will be useful for negotiations. The common soldiers, Tywin shrugs. Show them the same mercy they'd show us. As his commanders ride away to organize the assault, Tywin allows himself a moment of satisfaction. Before the sun reaches its peak, this rebellion will be broken. Robb Stark's gambit will cost him his only experienced commanders, leaving him with nothing but raw boys to face Jaime's veteran forces. The horns sound across the Lannister lines, their deep notes echoing off the water. 20,000 men surge forward in perfect formation, their boots thundering against the muddy ground. Banners wave overhead. The golden lion of Lannister, the burning tree of Marbrand, the purple unicorn of Brax. Across the ford, the northern forces seem pitifully small. Their shields form a thin line along the far bank, their spears rising like a sparse forest of iron points. No banners fly above them, save for a single direwolf standard that flutters defiantly in the morning wind. Tywin raises his sword, the steel catching what little sunlight breaks through the clouds. His destrier stamps impatiently beneath him, eager for the charge. Around him, his personal guard waits for the signal, their lances lowered and ready. Today we remind the North why the lion is king of beasts, he calls out, his voice carrying over the rush of water and the jingle of mail. The attack begins with a flight of crossbow bolts that darkens the sky like a plague of locusts. They fall among the northern ranks with deadly precision, punching through mail and leather with wet thuds. Men cry out and stumble, but the line holds. Tywin spurs his horse into the water, and the Lannister cavalry follows. The ford runs deeper than expected, rising to their horses' bellies, but the animals push forward with determination. Spray cascades around them as hundreds of hooves churn the dark water to foam. On the far bank, the northern archers draw their bows. Their arrows come in ragged volleys, lacking the discipline of Tywin's crossbowmen, but some find their marks. A knight beside Tywin grunts and sags in his saddle, a grey-fletched shaft protruding from his shoulder. The charge slows as they reach the deeper water, but Tywin drives them onward. His sword gleams as he raises it high, a signal for his men to follow. The Stark forces brace for impact. Their spear points lowered toward the approaching cavalry. Then, from the tree line behind the northern position, a horn sounds. Not the deep war horn of the Starks, but something higher, more urgent. A call to retreat. Tywin frowns as he sees the northern line beginning to waver. They're breaking, he thinks, but something about their movement seems too organized, too deliberate. This isn't the panicked rout of defeated men. An arrow hisses past his ear, so close he feels the fletching brush his helm. Another takes down his banner-bearer, sending the Golden Lion standard toppling into the churning water. The northern forces are falling back now, their retreat covered by a steady rain of arrows from the trees. It's a fighting withdrawal, executed with more skill than Tywin expected from such a young commander. His horse reaches the far bank, hooves scrambling for purchase on the muddy slope. Around him, his cavalry spreads out in pursuit of the retreating northerners. The battle is won, but something nags at him. Something about the timing, the coordination, the very ease of it all. A movement catches his eye from high in the oak trees that border the battlefield. A single archer, drawing back his bowstring with careful aim. Not at the Lannister soldiers below, but at something specific. Someone specific. Tywin turns in his saddle just as the arrow leaves the bow. Time seems to slow as the shaft arcs through the morning air, its grey fletching spinning lazily in flight. He has a moment to realize where it's aimed, a heartbeat to understand the perfect irony of it all. The arrow takes him in the throat, punching through the gap between his gorget and helm with surgical precision. He tries to speak, to call out orders, but blood fills his mouth instead of words. As Lord Tywin Lannister slides from his saddle into the muddy grass beside the Green Fork, his last thought is not of victory or defeat, but of a conversation with his father decades ago. Old Lord Titus had warned him that pride comes before the fall, but Tywin had never imagined his fall would come from a single, desperate arrow fired by a retreating enemy. The Golden Lion banner lies trampled in the mud beside him, its proud standard now nothing more than wet silk and splintered wood. Around him, the battle continues, but the war has already changed forever. The Golden Lion of Lannister lies still in the mud beside the Green Fork, its crimson silk banner darkening with blood and river water. Around the fallen lord, his personal guard stares in stunned silence. Sir Adam Marbrand reaches him first, dropping from his saddle with a crash of steel and leather. "My lord!" Adam shouts, but Tywin Lannister's eyes stare sightlessly at the grey morning sky. The arrow shaft protrudes from his throat like an accusation, its grey fletching already stained with gore. Sir Kevan Lannister spurs his destrier through the chaos of the charge, his own bannermen following behind. He sees his brother's horse wandering riderless through the melee and feels his stomach drop like a stone into dark water. "Form ranks," Kevin bellows to the knights around him. "Protect the Lord Commander." But when he reaches the small circle of guards surrounding Tywin's body, he sees the truth written in their faces. His brother, the man who rebuilt their house from his father's weakness, lies dead in foreign mud with enemy steel in his throat. The battle rages on around them, but the Lannister advance has stalled. Without Tywin's voice directing the assault, his commanders hesitate. Some continue pressing the attack against the retreating Northerners. Others pull back to defensive positions, uncertain of their orders. "Who commands now?" asks Sir Forley Prester, his sword still dripping with Northern blood. The question hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Kevin looks from face to face among the gathered knights, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their eyes. "I am Lord Tywin's brother," he says slowly. "The command falls to me." "But what are your orders, my lord?" Sir Adam stands beside Tywin's body, his face pale beneath his helm. "Do we continue the attack?" Kevin studies the battlefield spreading out before him. The northern forces have withdrawn deeper into the woods, their archers still sending occasional volleys from the tree line. His own troops are scattered across the field in small groups, some pursuing the enemy, others milling about in confusion. "Pull the men back to the fort," he commands. "Form a defensive line along this bank." "My lord?" Sir Forley steps closer, lowering his voice. "We have them beaten. They're in full retreat." "Are they?" Kevin asks, his voice sharp with sudden understanding. 2,000 men against our 20,000, and they've killed the Lord of Casterly Rock. Does this seem like defeat to you? The truth of it settles over them like a cold morning mist. This was never meant to be a victory for the North. It was meant to be a delay, a distraction, while the real Northern army moved elsewhere. But the distraction has achieved something far beyond young Stark's wildest hopes. A horn sounds from across the field, and the remaining Northern forces begin to withdraw deeper into the forest. They move in good order, their retreat covered by disciplined archers who know exactly when to loose and when to run. "They don't even know," whispers Sir Adam. "They don't realize what they've done." Kevin nods grimly. Somewhere in those trees, a northern archer thinks he's achieved nothing more than a lucky shot during a desperate retreat. He has no idea that his arrow has just changed the course of the entire war. "My lord, what do we tell the men?" asks Sir Forley. Before Kevin can answer, shouts erupt from the Lannister ranks along the riverbank. Word is spreading, carried by soldiers who witnessed the moment their commander fell. Voices rise in confusion and fear. "Lord Tywin is dead. The Northerners killed him. What do we do now?" Kevin watches as discipline begins to break down across his army. These men followed Tywin Lannister, not House Lannister. They trusted his reputation, his tactical brilliance, his ability to turn any disaster into victory. Without him, they're just 20,000 soldiers with no clear purpose. "Mount his lordship's body on his horse," Kevin orders. "We ride for King's Landing immediately. All of us, my lord?" Sir Adam looks uncertain. "What about the campaign in the Riverlands?" "What campaign?" Kevin's laugh carries no humour. "My brother divided our forces to fight on 2 fronts. He commanded one army, Sir Jaime the other. With Tywin dead, we have no unified strategy, no coordination between our forces." The implications begin to dawn on the assembled knights. Jaime lays siege to River Run with 30,000 men, expecting Tywin's forces to prevent northern reinforcements from reaching him. But now those reinforcements face no opposition at all. "Should we send word to Sir Jaime?" asks Sir Forley. "Send word how?" Kevin gestures toward the forest where the northern forces have vanished. "Through enemy territory, with hostile forces moving between us and River Run? Even if a message got through, what would it say?" That his father is dead and his army is in disarray? Shouts and the clash of steel echo from their left flank, where some Lannister soldiers have continued pursuing the retreating Northerners. A few moments later, survivors come stumbling back through the trees, their formations broken and their faces grim. "They had reserves waiting in the woods, my lord," reports a bloodied sergeant. "Caught us in an ambush when we followed too far. Lost half my men." Kevan nods. Even in retreat, the Northerners are thinking tactically. They're not running in panic. They're executing a planned withdrawal that punishes overconfident pursuit. Without Tywin's steady hand guiding the response, his army is stumbling into every trap the young wolf has set. "Form the baggage train," Kevan commands. "Gather our wounded. We march within the hour." "My lord," Sir Adam steps closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What do we tell Queen Cersei when we reach King's Landing?" The question Kevan has been dreading. How does he explain to Tywin's daughter that her father is dead? How does he tell the Queen that the foundation of Lannister power has just crumbled into dust beside a muddy river? "We tell her the truth," he says finally. "We tell her that the war has changed, and we need new strategies to win it." But even as he speaks the words, Kevan wonders if the war can still be won at all. Tywin Lannister was more than their general. He was their reputation, their deterrent against rebellion, their guarantee that Lannister gold would always triumph over Lannister enemies. The horns sound across the Lannister lines, calling for withdrawal. 20,000 men begin the long march south, leaving behind their victory and their confidence in the mud beside the Green Fork. Behind them, the forest stands silent, as if the very trees are holding their breath. In that silence, the course of 7 kingdoms has already begun to shift. The lion is dead, and the wolves are coming south in force. But the news will take days to spread, and in those days, the world will continue turning, as if nothing has changed, as if the most dangerous man in Westeros hadn't just died from a single desperate arrow fired by a boy who doesn't even know his name. The retreat begins, and with it, the collapse of everything Tywin Lannister spent his life building. The Raven arrives at Robb Stark's camp, just as the sun reaches its peak above the besieged walls of River Run. The young king in the north sits in his command tent, studying maps of the surrounding countryside with his lord's bannermen, when Sir Brynden Tully bursts through the tent flaps. "My lord, urgent news from the Green Fork." Robb looks up from the parchment spread before him. Around the table, Lords Umber, Mormont, and Karstark lean forward with interest. They all know what happened. There should have been a slaughter. "How many did we lose?" Robb asks, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Fewer than expected, my lord." The Blackfish's weathered face carries an expression Robb has never seen before, something between disbelief and triumph. "The Lannister army has withdrawn to King's Landing." "Withdrawn?" Lord Umber slams his fist on the table. 20,000 men don't withdraw from 2,000 unless their commander is dead. The Blackfish holds up the Raven scroll. "Lord Tywin Lannister fell in the battle, struck down by one of our archers during the retreat." Silence falls over the tent like a shroud. Robb stares at the message in Brynden's hands, trying to comprehend what this means for everything they've planned. "Dead?" he whispers. "Tywin Lannister is dead." His brother Sir Kevan confirms it. The entire Lannister host is marching south in disarray. Lord Karstark lets out a bark of laughter. "The Lion of Lannister, brought down by a boy with a bow. The gods have a sense of humor." But Robb isn't laughing. He's thinking of the siege lines before River Run, where his uncle Edmure waits for rescue that was supposed to come at terrible cost. He's thinking of Jaime Lannister's 30,000 men now cut off from their supply lines and reinforcements. "Send word to all our commanders," he says quietly. "We attack Jaime's forces at dawn." Meanwhile, in the royal apartments of the Red Keep, Queen Cersei Lannister reads the same news with hands that tremble like autumn leaves. The parchment falls from her fingers to the stone floor as she sinks into her chair. "No," she whispers to the empty room. "Not father. Not now." Joffrey finds her there an hour later, still staring at the fallen message. The young king picks up the parchment and reads it quickly, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and then something that might be excitement. "Grandfather is dead?" he asks. Cersei nods, unable to speak. "But that means I'm truly king now, doesn't it? No one can tell me what to do anymore." The words hit Cersei like a physical blow. She looks up at her son, seeing not grief or concern, but a twisted kind of satisfaction in his eyes. "Your grandfather died fighting to keep you on that throne," she says, her voice harsh with unshed tears. "And now I don't need him anymore." Joffrey's smile is cruel and cold. "I can rule as I see fit, without his constant lectures about restraint and political necessity." Cersei realizes with growing horror that her father's death has not sobered her son, but liberated him. Without Tywin's firm hand to check his impulses, Joffrey will be free to indulge every sadistic whim. "We need to call a council meeting," she says, standing on unsteady legs. "The lords will want to discuss strategy now that the real power in our house is gone." Joffrey's laugh echoes off the stone walls. "I am the king, mother. The lords will do as I command, or they'll lose their heads." At the Eyrie, Tyrion Lannister receives the news from an unexpected source. Lady Lysa Arryn enters his cell with a smile that makes him deeply uneasy. "I have news from the Riverlands, imp." Tyrion looks up from the book he's been reading, one of the few luxuries his captivity allows. "Good news, I assume, given your expression." "Your father is dead." The words hang in the air like a blade suspended over his neck. Tyrion sets down his book carefully, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. "How?" "Killed at the Green Fork by northern forces. His army is in full retreat." Tyrion closes his eyes, feeling the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew about his family's position. With Tywin dead, who will negotiate for his release? Who will even care enough to try? "I suppose this changes your plans for my trial," he says quietly. Lysa's smile widens. "On the contrary, with no Lord of Casterly Rock to demand your return, I can dispose of you as I see fit. Perhaps a flight from the Moon Door would be appropriate." On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon crumples the message in his fist and allows himself a rare smile. Sir Davos Seaworth stands beside him in the council chamber, watching his lord's reaction with interest. "Tywin Lannister was the only man in King's Landing with the skill to oppose me effectively," Stannis says. "With him gone, that boy king has no one left who can match my experience in war. What are your orders, my lord?" "Send ravens to all the lords who should be supporting my claim. Tell them that with Tywin dead, now is the time to declare for the rightful king. The usurper's dynasty grows weaker by the day." Davos nods. "And our fleet, my lord?" "Prepare for sail. We move against King's Landing within the fortnight." In the Reach, Renly Baratheon receives the news while hawking with Lord Mace Tyrell and his knights. The raven finds them beside a stream, where they've stopped to rest their horses and share wine in the afternoon sun. "Interesting," Renly muses, passing the message to Lord Tyrell. "Very interesting indeed." "My lord?" Mace Tyrell reads quickly, his eyebrows rising with each line. "Don't you see? Tywin Lannister was the only reason most lords hesitated to oppose Joffrey's claim. They feared his reprisals, his tactical brilliance, his vast wealth. With him gone, the boy king stands alone, Tyrell finishes. More than alone, he stands exposed. Renly's smile is sharp as a sword blade. Perhaps it's time I pressed my own claim to the Iron Throne. At Riverrun, Jaime Lannister continues his siege in blissful ignorance of his father's fate. He stands on a hill overlooking the castle walls, discussing the day's assault plans with his commanders. "The walls are weakening near the Watergate," reports Sir Forley Prester. "Another day of bombardment should open a breach wide enough for our men." Jaime nods, but his attention keeps drifting to the north, where he expects to see ravens bringing word of his father's victory over the young Stark. The silence troubles him more than he cares to admit. "Any word from Lord Tywin?" "None since yesterday, sir. But the distance is considerable, and ravens can be delayed by weather." Unknown to Jaime, his isolation is now complete. The northern forces that were supposed to be destroyed at the Green Fork are marching toward him in full strength. His supply lines back to the capital are threatened by hostile forces. His father, the man who taught him everything about war and politics, lies dead in foreign soil. The siege continues, but the besiegers have become the trapped. As the sun sets over Westeros, the ripples of Tywin Lannister's death spread like cracks in ice. In throne rooms and council chambers, on ships, and in army camps, the great lords begin to recalculate their positions. The man who held the realm together through fear and reputation is gone, and in his absence, ambition stirs like a waking dragon. The War of Five Kings is about to become something far more dangerous and unpredictable. Without Tywin's steady hand guiding events, the conflict will spread and intensify until it consumes everything in its path. But tonight, most of the realm sleeps unaware that their world has already changed forever. The lion is dead, and the long night of chaos is only just beginning. At Casterly Rock, Sir Kevan Lannister stares at the raven scroll in his hands, reading the words again and again, as if repetition might change their meaning. His brother Tywin is dead. The man who rebuilt their house from their father's weakness, who made the Lannister name feared across 7 kingdoms, lies in foreign soil with enemy steel in his throat. The Maester who brought the message shifts nervously in the solar doorway. "My lord, shall I prepare a response?" "To whom?" Kevan asks, his voice hollow. "My nephew sits the Iron Throne. My other nephew lays siege to Riverrun, and my brother lies dead beside a river. Who exactly commands House Lannister now?" Before the Maester can answer, shouts echo from the courtyard below. Kevan moves to the window and sees riders approaching the gate, their horses lathered with sweat and their banners bearing various sigils of Lannister bannermen. "It seems we're about to find out," he murmurs. Within the hour, Kevan's solar fills with lords and knights who have abandoned the retreating Lannister army. Lord Lefford, Sir Davin Lannister, Lord Craighall, all wear the same expression of uncertainty and fear. "The army is falling apart," Lord Lefford reports without preamble. "Half the men have deserted. Another quarter talk openly of switching sides. Without Lord Tywin's authority, there's nothing holding the host together." "And the commanders?" Kevan asks. Arguing among themselves. Some want to march north and link up with Sir Jaime. Others insist on returning to defend the Westerlands. Most just want to go home. Sir Davin, Kevan's own son, leans forward in his chair. "Uncle, we need to act quickly. The bannermen look to Casterly Rock for leadership." "Do they?" Kevan's laugh carries no humour. "Or do they look for the next strong lord who can protect their lands and families?" Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister faces her own crisis of authority. She sits at the head of the small council table, but the expressions on the faces around her range from skeptical to openly dismissive. "Your Grace," Grand Maester Pycelle begins carefully. "With Lord Tywin's passing, the question of military command becomes pressing." "There is no question," Cersei snaps. "I am Queen Mother and Regent. The Lannister forces answer to me." Lord Commander Sir Barristan Selmy clears his throat. "Your Grace, the army requires someone with battlefield experience. Perhaps we should recall Ser Jaime from River Run to take command. Ser Jaime has his own campaign to finish. I will handle military matters until he returns." The silence that follows is telling. Even Joffrey, slouched in the Iron Throne, looks uncomfortable with his mother's declaration. "Mother," he says slowly, "perhaps grandfather's knights would prefer to follow another Lannister, one who has actually led men in battle." The words hit Cersei like a slap. Her own son questions her authority in front of the entire council. "I have advised your grandfather on military matters for years," she says, her voice rising dangerously. "I know more about warfare than half the knights in this city." "Advising is not commanding," Lord Varys interjects smoothly. "The men need a leader they trust to keep them alive." At the Eyrie, Lysa Arryn paces her solar like a caged animal, her mind racing with possibilities. Tyrion Lannister's value as a hostage has changed dramatically overnight. With Tywin dead, who will negotiate for the imp's release? "My lady," her captain of guards enters with a bow. Lord Petter requests an audience. Littlefinger enters with his usual sardonic smile, but his eyes are sharp with calculation. "Lysa, my dear, I bring interesting news from the capital. About the imp's father. About opportunity." Peter moves to the window overlooking the courtyard where prisoners take their daily exercise. With Tywin gone, the political landscape has shifted dramatically. The North grows stronger by the day, while King's Landing grows weaker. What are you suggesting? That perhaps it's time to reconsider which side offers the greatest advantage. The Starks may soon be in a position to offer terms more favorable than the Lannisters ever could. Lysa stops pacing. "You think I should release the imp? I think you should consider what gesture might earn the most goodwill from the likely victors of this war." At River Run, Sir Jaime Lannister studies the siege lines as dawn breaks over the riverlands. Something feels wrong, though he cannot identify exactly what. His supply wagons arrived late yesterday, and the men seem restless in a way that has nothing to do with battle fatigue. Sir Jaime, his squire, approaches hesitantly. The men are asking about Lord Tywin. They expected word by now. "Ravens fly when they fly," Jaime replies, but privately he shares their concern. His father should have crushed the northern diversionary force days ago and sent word of victory. Inside River Run's walls, Sir Edmure Tully watches the Lannister siege lines from the battlements. His uncle Brynden stands beside him, both men noting subtle changes in their enemy's behavior. "They're not pressing as hard as they should," Edmure observes. "Yesterday's assault was half-hearted at best." "Something's happened," the Blackfish agrees. "Look at their supply train. It's smaller than yesterday, and half the wagons are turning back toward the capital." "Could Robb have achieved something at the Green Fork?" "More than we dared hope, I think." Back in the capital, the fractures in Lannister unity become more apparent with each passing hour. In the castle's lower chambers, Lannister knights and bannermen gather in small groups, their conversations growing louder and more contentious. "I won't take orders from the Queen," declares Sir Addison Hill, a veteran of Robert's rebellion. "She's never led men in battle, never felt enemy steel. What does she know of war?" "But who else commands us?" asks another knight. Sir Jaime is trapped at River Run. Sir Kevin remains at Casterly Rock, and Tyrion is a prisoner. Then perhaps we should consider our options carefully, suggests Lord Paxter Redwine, who has remained quiet until now. House Lannister has other enemies besides the Starks. Without Lord Tywin's protection, how long before Dawn remembers old grievances? How long before the Iron Islands see weakness and attack our coasts? The questions hang in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Without Tywin's unifying presence, every old grudge and buried ambition begins to surface. At Casterly Rock, Kevin faces the same dissolution of authority. A raven arrives from one of their bannermen in the field, reporting that entire companies have abandoned their positions. Lord Kevin, the message reads, without Lord Tywin's leadership, I cannot in good conscience march my men to their deaths in a war we can no longer win. I am withdrawing to defend my own lands. I remain your faithful servant, Lord Liddon. Similar messages arrive throughout the day. Lords who fought loyally under Tywin's banner now question the wisdom of continued resistance. The mathematical certainty of Lannister victory has evaporated overnight. We're bleeding supporters faster than battlefield casualties, Sir Davin reports grimly. If this continues, we'll have no army left to command. Kevin nods, understanding the crisis with painful clarity. Tywin's reputation was their shield, his tactical brilliance their sword, his vast wealth their armor. Without him, House Lannister is just another noble family with enemies on all sides. Send ravens to all our remaining bannermen, he orders finally. Summon them to Casterly Rock for a council of war. If House Lannister is to survive, we need new strategies and new leadership. And if they refuse to come? Kevin stares out at the sunset sea, its waters grey and choppy under the overcast sky. Then we'll know exactly how far our house has fallen. As night falls across Westeros, the disintegration of Lannister power accelerates. What took Tywin decades to build crumbles in days without his steady hand to guide it. The pride that held their coalition together has died with its architect, leaving only ambition, fear, and the scramble for survival. The lion's roar has been silenced, and in that silence, every enemy grows bolder, while every ally recalculates their loyalties. The war that should have ended with Tywin's victory at the Green Fork has instead become a disaster that threatens to consume everything he built. Robb Stark stands before his war council in the great pavilion outside River Run's walls, maps spread across oak tables, while his bannermen lean forward with expressions ranging from triumph to uncertainty. The news of Tywin Lannister's death has reached every corner of the northern camp, but Robb sees opportunity where others might see chaos. My lords, he begins, his voice carrying the quiet authority that has grown stronger with each victory. Tywin Lannister's death changes everything. Jaime's army is now isolated, cut off from reinforcement and supply. Lord Umber slams his fist on the table with satisfaction. The Kingslayer trapped like a rat in a barrel. I say we crush him tomorrow at dawn. Patience serves us better than haste, Catelyn Stark interjects from her seat beside her son. Tywin's death makes our enemies desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. Robb nods to his mother, then addresses the council. Which is exactly why we must strike now, before Jaime realizes his position. Sir Brynden, what do your scouts report? The Blackfish unfurls a detailed map of the area around River Run. Jaime has 30,000 men, but they're spread thin around the siege lines. His cavalry is camped here, in the Whispering Wood, separated from his main force by nearly 2 miles. His father would never have made such a mistake, observes Lord Karstark. His father is dead, Robb replies simply, And Jaime doesn't know it yet. He's still fighting yesterday's war, expecting Tywin's forces to support him. Mage Mormont studies the map with a warrior's eye. If we strike his horse first, his infantry becomes vulnerable. But 30,000 men, my lord, even without their cavalry, will break when their commander is taken. Robb traces possible attack routes with his finger. We don't need to destroy Jaime's entire army. We need to capture him. The tent falls silent as the implications sink in. Lords Blackwood and Bracken, recent additions to Robb's council after declaring against the Lannisters, exchange meaningful glances. "A bold strategy, Your Grace," Lord Blackwood says carefully. "But what if Jaime escapes? What if word reaches him about his father before we can attack?" "Then we adapt," Robb answers. "But I don't believe it will. Jaime's pride won't let him believe his father could fall to northern forces. He'll dismiss any rumors as enemy propaganda." Catelyn shifts uncomfortably. "Robb, capturing Jaime will make you a target for every Lannister supporter in Westeros. Without Tywin to negotiate, they might attempt rescue or revenge." "Mother, with Tywin dead, who speaks for House Lannister? Cersei? Joffrey? Sir Keevan?" Robb's smile is sharp as winter steel. Their house fractures without its cornerstone. Jaime's capture will accelerate that collapse. The War Council continues through the night, but Robb's mind is already made up. At dawn, they will strike the Lannister cavalry in the Whispering Wood, while the main force prepares for siege warfare that will never come. Dawn breaks grey and cold over the riverlands. In the Whispering Wood, Jaime Lannister's cavalry camps among ancient oaks, their horses grazing peacefully, while knights break their fast around small fires. They expect another day of routine siege work, unaware that death approaches through the morning mist. Robb leads the attack himself, grey wind loping silently beside his horse as 2,000 northern cavalry flow through the trees like a pack of hunting wolves. The Lannister sentries die without raising an alarm, throats cut by scouts who learned their craft in the deep woods of the north. The attack comes with the sudden violence of a thunderstorm. Northern cavalry crashes into the Lannister camp from 3 directions, their war cries echoing off the ancient trees. Horses rear and scream as steel meets steel in the dim green light beneath the canopy. Jaime Lannister emerges from his pavilion half-dressed, sword in hand and golden hair, wild with sleep. He sees the chaos engulfing his camp and reacts with the instincts of a born warrior, rallying his men even as northern steel cuts them down around him. "To me!" he shouts, his voice carrying over the battle's din. "Form ranks! Drive them back!" But there are no ranks to form. The Northerners have shattered his forces' organization, turning discipline into desperate individual combat. Knights who should fight as units instead fight alone, surrounded by enemies who know these woods as intimately as their own hall. Grey wind leaps from the shadows, massive jaws clamping down on a Lannister knight's throat. The direwolf's presence spreads terror through enemy ranks as much as any sword. Horses bolt in panic, throwing riders into the path of northern spears. Robb cuts through the melee, searching for golden armor among the red and gold banners. He finds Jaime near the camp's center, surrounded by a dozen loyal knights who fight with desperate courage against overwhelming odds. "Jaime Lannister," Robb calls out, raising his sword high. "Your father is dead. Surrender, and I promise you honorable treatment." Jaime's response is a snarl of rage. "Liar! My father doesn't die to northern dogs." He spurs his destrier forward, sword gleaming as he aims for Robb's heart. But a crossbow bolt takes his horse in the chest, sending both rider and mount crashing to the forest floor. Jaime rolls clear of his falling horse, somehow keeping hold of his sword, but finds himself facing a circle of northern spears. "It's true," Robb says. Dismounting to face the Kingslayer on equal terms, Lord Tywin fell at the Green Fork, struck down by one of our archers. Your army stands alone." The words hit Jaime like physical blows. He looks around at the carnage surrounding him, seeing his cavalry command destroyed, his men dead or fled, his position hopeless. "Yield, Sir Jaime," Robb offers again. "There's been enough bloodshed today." For a moment, the Kingslayer seems to consider charging anyway, dying sword in hand rather than accepting capture. But survival instincts, honed through years of warfare, override pride. His sword falls to the forest floor with a metallic ring. "I yield," he says through gritted teeth. The Battle of the Whispering Wood ends as suddenly as it began. Northern forces round up prisoners, while their casualties prove remarkably light. Jaime's cavalry force, caught completely unprepared, suffered catastrophic losses in less than an hour. Inside River Run, Sir Edmure Tully watches from the battlements as chaos erupts in the Lannister siege lines. With their cavalry destroyed and their commander captured, the remaining forces begin to break apart. Some attempt to march toward the capital, others scatter to protect their own lands, most simply abandon their positions and flee. "Open the gates," Edmure commands. "Send out ravens to every lord in the Riverlands. Tell them Jaime Lannister is taken and the siege is broken." By midday, Robb Stark sits in River Run's great hall, receiving the submission of Lord Tytos Blackwood and Lord Yonos Bracken, bitter enemies who now unite under his banner. The political transformation is as dramatic as the military victory. "Your Grace," Lord Blackwood says, kneeling before the young king, "the Riverlands stand ready to support your cause. With the Lannister threat removed, we can finally strike back at those who burned our lands." But it's Catelyn who raises the crucial question as the celebrations continue around them. "Robb, you must decide now. Do you press your claim as king in the north, or do you support Stannis Baratheon's claim to the Iron Throne?" The great hall falls silent. Lords who minutes before were celebrating now wait to hear which path their young king will choose. Stannis has the better claim, by law, Lord Karstark points out carefully. "But he's never lifted a finger to help the North," counters Lord Umber. "Why should we fight his battles when we can win our own?" Robb looks at the faces around him. Northern lords who have followed him into battle. Riverlands lords who now see him as their liberator. His mother who counsels wisdom over ambition. "We'll discuss terms with all claimants," he says finally. "But I won't trade northern independence for southern promises. Our people have bled too much to simply hand power back to whoever sits the Iron Throne." The decision sends ripples through the assembled lords. Some nod with satisfaction, others look troubled by the implications. As the day wanes, Robb stands on River Run's battlements with his mother, looking out over the Riverlands that have become his by right of conquest. "You realize what this means," Catelyn says softly. "With Tywin dead and Jaime captured, we've removed the two most competent Lannister commanders. Their remaining forces will be led by lesser men. Which makes our enemies more dangerous, not less," Robb replies. "Desperate people make desperate choices. Without Tywin's restraining hand, who knows what madness Cersei or Joffrey might attempt?" As if summoned by his words, a raven arrives bearing the royal seal. The message is brief but telling. "To the traitor, Robb Stark, release Sir Jaime immediately or face the crown's full wrath. Joffrey of House Baratheon, first of his name, king of the Andals and the First Men." Robb crumples the parchment and tosses it into the wind. "The boy king threatens us while his kingdom crumbles around him. What would your father say about such leadership?" "That pride comes before the fall," Catelyn answers. "But whose pride and whose fall remains to be seen. The sun sets over a changed world. In one day, the balance of power has shifted dramatically. The North has proven it can defeat Lannister forces in open battle. The Riverlands have rallied to a new king. The most dangerous Lannister commander sits in chains, but victories in war often create more problems than they solve, and Robb Stark is beginning to understand that killing lions only makes the surviving cats more desperate and unpredictable. The Iron Throne sits empty in the morning light, as King Joffrey paces the great hall like a caged animal, his crown askew and his royal robes rumpled from a sleepless night. Word of Jaime's capture arrived with the dawn, carried by ravens that also brought news of northern victories throughout the Riverlands. "They dare!" he shrieks, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "They dare take my uncle! I'll have their heads! I'll have all their heads!" Cersei watches her son from the base of the Iron Throne's steps, seeing not a king but a boy overwhelmed by forces beyond his comprehension. Without Tywin's steady presence to guide him, Joffrey's worst impulses run unchecked. "Your Grace," she begins carefully, "perhaps we should call a council meeting to discuss our response." "I know what our response should be." Joffrey whirls to face her, spittle flying from his lips. "Execute Ned Stark, put his head on a spike, and show these northern dogs what happens when they defy their king." The suggestion makes Cersei's blood run cold. Her father's last counsel before marching north had been clear. Ned Stark alive is worth more than Ned Stark dead. A living hostage can be negotiated with. A martyred lord becomes a rallying cry for enemies. Son, we discussed this. Lord Stark's value lies in keeping him alive for prisoner exchanges. Value? What value? Joffrey's laugh borders on hysteria. They have Uncle Jaime, they killed grandfather, and still you talk about negotiation? I am the king. They will obey me, or they will die. Before Cersei can respond, the great doors swing open, and the members of the small council enter for their morning session. Lord Varys glides forward with his usual silken smile, but his eyes are sharp with calculation. Behind him, Lord Baelish moves with predatory grace, while Grandmaster Pycelle shuffles along with scrolls and ledgers tucked under his arms. Sir Barristan Selmy enters last, his white cloak pristine despite the early hour, but his lined face bears an expression of deep concern. "Your Grace," Pycelle begins, bowing deeply, "we have received troubling reports from across the realm." "Troubling?" Joffrey's voice rises dangerously. "What's troubling is that my enemies are still breathing. Tell me you have good news, or I'll find counselors who can provide some." The threat hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Varys and Littlefinger exchange meaningful glances, while Barristan's hand instinctively moves toward his sword hilt. "Perhaps we might discuss these matters more privately," Varys suggests smoothly. The throne room carries voices to many ears. They retreat to the small council chamber, but the change of venue does nothing to improve the mood. Joffrey throws himself into his chair at the head of the table, while Cersei takes her seat beside him, her face pale with suppressed anxiety. "Report," Joffrey demands. Pycelle clears his throat nervously. "Your Grace, the treasury situation has become complicated. Lord Tywin's death means we no longer have access to Casterly Rock's gold mines. Our debts to the Iron Bank of Braavos continue to mount, and they've begun asking pointed questions about repayment schedules." "Then pay them!" Joffrey slams his fist on the table. "With what funds, Your Grace?" Littlefinger's voice carries a hint of amusement. "The Crown's coffers hold perhaps enough gold to fund the realm for another month, maybe 2 if we're frugal." Cersei feels the foundations of her world shifting beneath her feet. Tywin had always handled the kingdom's finances with the efficiency of a master craftsman. Without him, the true extent of their financial troubles becomes starkly apparent. "What about our allies?" she asks. "Surely the great houses loyal to the crown can provide loans or support." "That brings us to another concern," Varys interjects delicately. "Several houses that previously declared for King Joffrey have suddenly grown quiet. Lord Redwyn has recalled his fleet to defend the Reach. Lord Hightower speaks of consolidating his forces at Old Town. Even some minor houses in the Crownlands whisper of hedging their allegiances." "Cowards and traitors, all of them," Joffrey snarls. "Execute them too." "Your Grace," Sir Barristan speaks for the first time, his voice grave with concern, "executing allies for caution will only drive more houses into rebellion. The realm needs stability, not more bloodshed." The words strike Joffrey like a slap. He turns on the Lord Commander with eyes blazing with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment, Sir Barristan? I am offering counsel, as is my duty to the crown." "Your duty is to obey your king." Joffrey's voice cracks with rage. "Maybe I need a Lord Commander who understands that." The silence that follows is deafening. Barristan's weathered face shows no emotion, but his hand remains near his sword. Varys studies his fingernails with exaggerated interest, while Littlefinger's smile grows wider. Cersei recognizes the danger immediately. Alienating Barristan would be catastrophic, but challenging Joffrey's authority publicly could provoke an even worse explosion. "What the king means," she says carefully, "is that these are difficult times requiring decisive action. Perhaps we should focus on practical solutions rather than philosophical debates." Pycelle seizes the opportunity to change topics. "Your Grace, we've also received requests for audiences from several foreign dignitaries. The Tyroshi ambassador seeks new trade agreements, and there are whispers that Dorne might be willing to discuss closer ties." "Dorne?" Cersei's interest sharpens. "What kind of ties?" "Marriage alliances, mutual defense pacts, economic partnerships," Littlefinger suggests smoothly. "Prince Doran is no fool. He sees opportunity in the current chaos." Joffrey waves dismissively. "I don't need Dornish sand rats. I have armies." "Do we?" The question comes from Sir Barristan, spoken so quietly that everyone strains to hear it. "What did you say?" Joffrey's voice drops to a dangerous whisper. "I asked if we truly have armies, Your Grace. Lord Tywin's death scattered one host. Sir Jaime's capture eliminated another. What forces can the crown actually field at this moment?" The question exposes the heart of their crisis. Without Tywin's military genius and Jaime's battlefield leadership, the crown's actual military strength has evaporated almost overnight. "We have the city watch," Cersei says weakly. 2,000 men, Barristan confirms. "Against how many enemies? The North, the Riverlands, Stannis on Dragonstone, Renly in the Reach, and that's assuming no other houses join the rebellion." "Then we hire sellswords," Joffrey shouts. "We'll recruit from Essos. We'll buy an army." "With what gold?" Littlefinger's question is gently mocking. "Sellswords require payment in advance, Your Grace. Trust is not a currency they accept." The meeting dissolves into increasingly desperate suggestions and bitter arguments. Cersei watches her son's authority crumble with each exchange, seeing how quickly a kingdom can collapse without competent leadership at its head. When the council finally adjourns, she corners Varys in the corridor outside. "How bad is it, really?" she asks. The spider's smile never wavers, but his eyes are cold as winter ice. "Your Grace, empires fall slowly, then suddenly. I fear we may be approaching the suddenly phase." "And where does that leave you, Lord Varys? Still serving the crown?" "I serve the realm, Your Grace. I have always served the realm. The crown is merely temporary. The words chill her more than any threat. As Varys glides away down the corridor, Cersei realizes that her father's death has not just weakened House Lannister militarily and financially. It has freed every ambitious player in the capital to pursue their own agendas without fear of consequences. That evening, she stands on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over King's Landing. In the distance, she can see smoke rising from the poorer quarters of the city, where rumors of military defeats and financial crisis have sparked unrest among the common folk. A knock at her door interrupts her brooding. A servant enters with a silver tray bearing several rolled parchments. Messages from potential allies, Your Grace. Cersei unrolls the first scroll from House Redwine and reads their polite but firm refusal to commit more forces to the Crown's cause. The second, from a minor lord in the Westerlands, suggests that perhaps it might be time for new leadership in House Lannister. The third message makes her hands shake. It bears the seal of the Iron Bank of Braavos and contains a formal demand for immediate repayment of outstanding debts, with a not-so-subtle threat about what happens to kingdoms that default on their obligations. As night falls over the capital, Cersei finally understands the true scope of the disaster. Tywin's death has not just removed a military commander or political advisor. It has destroyed the entire foundation upon which Lannister power rested. Without his reputation, his wealth, his tactical brilliance, and his ruthless competence, House Lannister is revealed as just another noble family with more enemies than friends. The crown that seemed so secure when her father lived now feels like a weight that might drag them all to the bottom of Blackwater Bay. And somewhere in the Riverlands, her enemies grow stronger with each passing day, feeding on the chaos that spreads from King's Landing like plague from an infected wound. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stands before his war table as dawn breaks over the narrow sea, studying wooden markers that represent armies, fleets, and loyalties across the Seven Kingdoms. The carved dragon that marks his position seems to pulse with renewed life in the morning light. The situation has changed dramatically, he tells Ser Davos Seaworth, moving the golden lion marker that represented Tywin's forces off the board entirely. Remove the primary obstacle, and suddenly many paths become possible. Davos studies the table with a smuggler's eye for opportunity. The Lannisters always claimed the largest army, my lord, without Lord Tywin's host and with Sir Jaime captured. They're reduced to what they can scrape together in King's Landing and the Westerlands, perhaps 30,000 men at most, scattered and demoralized. Stannis places a black stag marker near the capital. I can field 20,000 from Dragonstone and the Stormlands. More importantly, I can field them as a unified force under competent command. When do we sail, my lord? Within the fortnight. Send ravens to every lord who owes me allegiance. Tell them that the usurper's dynasty grows weaker by the day, and the rightful king prepares to claim what is his by law. Meanwhile, in the gardens of Highgarden, Renly Baratheon walks among the roses with Lord Mace Tyrell, their conversation punctuated by the laughter of courtiers and the music of water fountains. The scene appears peaceful, but both men's minds work with the precision of siege engines. The crown's position has become precarious, Mace observes, pausing beside a bush heavy with golden blooms. My daughter Margaery was to marry King Joffrey, but recent events make me question the wisdom of that alliance. Renly plucks a rose and twirls it between his fingers. Joffrey is a boy king without competent advisers. My brother Stannis is competent, but lacks the charisma to inspire loyalty. The realm needs a leader who can unite the great houses, not divide them further. And you believe you are that leader? I believe I could be, with the right support. Renly's smile is charming, but his eyes are calculating. The Reach commands the largest army in Westeros. The Stormlands remember their loyalty to House Baratheon. Together we could field 100,000 men. Mace nods slowly. My bannermen grow restless, watching the realm tear itself apart. They want action, not endless waiting. Then give them action. Crown me king, and I'll give them the war they want and the victory they deserve. In Sunspear, Prince Oberyn Martell paces the water gardens like a viper coiled to strike, his dark eyes bright with possibilities that seemed impossible just days before. His brother Prince Doran watches from his wheelchair, his expression thoughtful. Tywin Lannister kept us in check for 20 years, Oberyn says, his voice tight with controlled anger. Every time we sought justice for Elia, for her children, his reputation made the cost too high. Now that reputation lies dead beside the Green Fork. Revenge is a dish best served cold, brother, but the realm burns hot with war. Perhaps this is our moment. Oberyn stops pacing and faces his brother directly. The mountain still lives. Sir Gregor Clegane still draws breath, while Elia's bones rest cold in her tomb. Without Tywin to protect him. Without Tywin, many things become possible, Doran agrees. But we must be careful. The North has proven they can kill lions, but that doesn't make them our friends. We need allies, not just enemies of our enemies. Then we choose carefully. Support whoever seems most likely to put the mountain's head on a spike. At Casterly Rock, the crisis of leadership grows more apparent with each passing hour. Sir Kevan Lannister sits in his brother's solar, surrounded by ravens bearing messages from bannermen across the Westerlands. Most carry the same theme: uncertainty about the future and requests for guidance. Lord Lefford enters without ceremony, his face grim with bad news. 3 more houses have declared neutrality, he reports. Lords Banefort, Westerling, and Farman all claim they need to protect their own lands first. Neutrality. Kevin's laugh is bitter, a polite way of abandoning a sinking ship. Can we blame them? Without Lord Tywin's leadership, what do we offer them? The promise of victory rings hollow when our armies lie scattered and our leaders captured or dead. A knock at the door interrupts their conversation. A young squire enters with a message bearing the direwolf seal of House Stark. What does the young wolf want now? Kevin mutters, breaking the seal. He reads quickly, his eyebrows rising with each line. He offers terms. Terms! Robb Stark proposes a separate peace with the Westerlands. Withdraw all support from King Joffrey's government, declare neutrality in the war, and he'll guarantee our lands remain unmolested by northern forces. Lord Lefford leans forward with interest. Those are generous terms. Generous because he doesn't need to fight us, Kevin realizes. He's won already. This is mercy disguised as negotiation. In the Riverlands, Robb Stark sits across from Lord Walder Frey in the Great Hall of the Twins, but the dynamic between them has shifted dramatically since their last meeting. Where once the Stark King came as a supplicant, now he negotiates from a position of overwhelming strength. Things have changed since we last spoke, Robb says quietly, his dire-wolf grey wind lying at his feet like a living reminder of northern power. Walder Frey cackles from his high seat, but his eyes are sharp with calculation. Indeed they have, Your Grace. Word reaches even these old stones about lions falling to wolf packs. My offer remains the same. Safe passage for my army, and in return, House Frey receives favourable treatment in the new order. And if I refuse? Do you still need my bridge now that Tywin Lannister can't threaten your rear? Rob's smile is polite but cold. Lord Frey, I could take your bridge by force, if needed. I offer alliance because I prefer willing allies to conquered enemies. But make no mistake, my army will cross the Trident whether you help or not. The old lord studies the young king with newfound respect. You've grown teeth, boy. Very well. The Freys will remember who showed them courtesy in their hour of decision. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the High Septon stands before the altar of the great Sept of Baelor, leading the morning prayers with unusual fervour. His voice carries to the thousands of faithful who pack the Sept's nave, their faces upturned with desperate hope. The Father judges all men by their deeds, he intones, his voice echoing off the crystal dome above. Kings and beggars alike face his justice. Let us pray for wisdom in these dark times, that righteousness might triumph over wickedness. After the service, he speaks privately with several prominent Septons in the Sept's inner chambers. The realm suffers, he says quietly. War spreads like plague, and those who should protect the innocent instead pursue their own ambitions. What would you have us do, Your Holiness? Asks Septon Torbert. Remind the faithful that kings derive their authority from the Seven, not from gold or steel. Perhaps it is time the faith took a more active role in guiding the realm toward righteousness. As the day wanes, ravens fly from castle to castle across Westeros, carrying messages that redraw the map of loyalties. In the north, minor lords who remained neutral declare for Robb Stark. In the Reach, Tyrell bannermen speak openly of crowning Renly. In the Stormlands, lords who feared Tywin's retaliation begin mobilizing for Stannis. The power vacuum left by Tywin's death creates opportunities that seemed impossible just days before. Every ambitious lord sees a chance for advancement, every old grievance a possibility for redress, every regional power a path to greater influence. But perhaps most significantly, the common people begin to stir. In market squares and taverns, in septs and fields, ordinary folk whisper that the mighty can fall just as easily as anyone else. The man who seemed untouchable, whose reputation kept half the realm in line through fear alone, lies dead in foreign mud. If Tywin Lannister could die from a single arrow, what other certainties might prove false? What other powers might prove more fragile than they appeared? The War of Five Kings is becoming something larger and more chaotic than anyone anticipated. Without Tywin's steady hand to limit the conflict's scope, ambition spreads like wildfire across a realm that grows more unstable with each passing day. In their separate locations, the great lords make their calculations and prepare their armies. Some seek power, others revenge. Still others simple survival in a world suddenly turned upside down. But all of them understand one thing. The old order died with Tywin Lannister, and whatever emerges from the chaos will be shaped by whoever proves strongest, smartest, and most ruthless in the days to come. The Game of Thrones has begun in earnest, and the rules have changed overnight. The golden fields of the Westerlands burn under a blood-red sky as Robb Stark's army sweeps through the richest lands in Westeros like a pack of starving wolves. What should have been the most heavily defended region of the realm offers only token resistance to the northern advance. Robb sits astride his destrier on a hill overlooking the smoking ruins of Ashmark, grey wind pacing restlessly at his horse's feet. Below them, northern soldiers load wagons with grain, gold, and weapons taken from Lord Marbrand's abandoned castle. The resistance collapsed faster than we expected, reports Sir Brynden Tully, riding up beside his great-nephew. Lord Marbrand's forces scattered at the first sight of our banners. They're fighting without purpose now, Robb observes, watching his men methodically strip the castle of anything useful. Tywin gave them a cause worth dying for. Without him, they're just protecting castles for lords who can't guarantee their safety. Lord Umber approaches with a bloodied sword and a grim smile. The crag falls to us within the hour, Your Grace. Lord Westerling offers his surrender and his daughter's hand in marriage to cement his new loyalty. Robb barely glances at the offer. His mind works on larger strategic problems. How long until we reach Casterly Rock? 3 days if we maintain this pace, the Blackfish answers. But Your Grace, attempting to storm the rock itself won't be necessary. Robb's smile is sharp as winter steel. Casterly Rock's strength was never its walls, it was the man who commanded from within them. Meanwhile, at Casterly Rock itself, Sir Tywin Lannister stands on the battlements, watching the horizon for signs of approaching enemies. The great castle that has stood unconquered for centuries feels hollow without Tywin's presence, its massive stones offering cold comfort against the fear that gnaws at every defender. My lord, Sir Davin approaches, with a dispatch clutched in his trembling hand. Word from our scouts. The Stark army moves toward us in 3 separate columns. They'll be here before week's end. Kevin takes the message, but doesn't read it immediately. He's been dreading this moment since word of his brother's death reached him. How many men do we have inside the rock? 2,000, perhaps less. Half are green boys who've never seen battle. The rest are older men past their prime. Against how many northerners? 20,000, my lord. Battle-hardened veterans who have just conquered half the Westerlands without serious opposition. Kevin finally reads the dispatch, his face growing paler with each line. They're not just marching toward us. They're systematically destroying everything that made our lands valuable. The gold mines at Nuns Deep, the silver mines near the Tumblestone, the trading posts along the coast. Why destroy what they could capture? Because they're not interested in ruling the Westerlands. They want to cripple House Lannister's ability to fund resistance. Kevin crumples the parchment in his fist. My brother would have understood this strategy immediately. I'm 3 steps behind a boy young enough to be my son. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon oversees the loading of his war galleys as his fleet prepares for the assault on King's Landing. The ancient Targaryen stronghold bustles with activity as soldiers sharpen weapons, armorers check mail, and sailors ready their ships for war. The winds favor us, my lord, reports Sir Davos, approaching with charts tucked under his arm. We can be in Blackwater Bay within 2 days. Stannis nods grimly. And what opposition do we face? The royal fleet numbers perhaps 40 ships, but many are undermanned. Without Lord Tywin's gold to pay proper wages, they've been losing sailors to desertion. And on land? King's Landing's garrison holds perhaps 5,000 men, but their loyalty grows questionable with each passing day. The common folk mutter about food shortages and rising prices. Stannis studies the carved dragon on his war table, thinking of his brother Robert and the crown that should have passed to him by right. Ready the fleet. We sail at dawn. It's time to remind the realm that law matters more than gold, that rightful kings don't need to buy their crowns. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon's camp has grown into a small city as lords from across the realm flock to his banners. Pavilions stretch to the horizon in every direction, their colourful banners snapping in the wind like a field of flowers come to life. 80,000 men, and still they come, Lord Mace Tyrell reports with obvious satisfaction. House Tarly brings another 3,000, and Lords Redwyn and Hightower promise their fleets. Renly sits in his great pavilion, surrounded by the pomp and pageantry of a royal court. Young knights joust for his entertainment, while lords compete to offer him the richest gifts and most beautiful daughters. The crown sits heavy on that boy king's head, he muses, watching a particularly spectacular joust through the pavilion's silk walls. Perhaps it's time someone more suited to kingship relieved him of that burden. The lords grow eager for action, Your Grace, Mace continues. They want to march on King's Landing before winter sets in. Soon, Renly promises. Let Stannis exhaust himself against the capital's defences first. We'll arrive as liberators, not conquerors. But while the great lords play their games of war and politics, smaller predators emerge to feast on the chaos they've created. In the Riverlands, where armies have marched back and forth, leaving destruction in their wake, a different kind of resistance takes shape. Beric Dondarrion, once a knight of the King's Peace, now leads a growing band of outlaws through the war-torn countryside. The Brotherhood without banners strikes at vulnerable supply trains and isolated garrisons, always vanishing back into the forests before organized pursuit can find them. The lords fight their war, Beric tells his followers around a hidden campfire. But who protects the common folk caught between the armies? Thoros of Myre raises his cup in salute. We do, my lord. We are the shield that guards the realms of men. Their latest raid netted them gold meant for Lannister, sellswords, and grain intended for King's Landing's garrison. Both will instead feed refugees displaced by the fighting, continuing a pattern that makes the Brotherhood heroes to the small folk and thorns in the side of every faction. On the seas around Westeros, pirates grow bolder as the royal fleet focuses on defending the capital. The Stepstones, long a haven for smugglers and raiders, erupts with activity as captains realize that Tywin's swift justice no longer threatens their operations. The lion's claws are clipped, laughs Captain Salador Saan, as his ship takes another merchant vessel without resistance. Now we hunt as we please, and who will stop us? Trade routes that flourished under Tywin's protection now run red with blood and black with smoke. Merchant ships travel in convoys or not at all, driving up prices for everything from silk to steel throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The economic foundation that supported royal authority begins to crumble as surely as its military power. Without trade revenues, the crown cannot pay its debts. Without gold to buy loyalty, it cannot count on allies. Without allies, it cannot field armies to restore order. In King's Landing, Cersei receives reports of these disasters with growing desperation. Each raven brings news of another defeat, another defection, another sign that the Lannister hold-on power grows weaker by the day. We need sellswords, she tells the small council. Hire them from Essos if necessary. With what gold, Your Grace? Littlefinger's question is gently mocking. The treasury holds barely enough to pay this month's expenses. Then borrow more from the Iron Bank. The Iron Bank has made it clear that further loans require collateral. They suggest the crown jewels as security. The suggestion hits Cersei like a physical blow. Pawning the crown jewels would be a public admission of weakness that even her enemies would interpret as desperation. There must be another way. There is, Varys interjects smoothly. Negotiate. Make peace with your enemies before they grow too strong to defeat. Never. Cersei's voice carries the steel of absolute determination. House Lannister does not surrender. Then House Lannister may soon cease to exist, the spider replies with his usual smile. As night falls across Westeros, the military campaigns initiated by Tywin's death continue their relentless advance. In the Westerlands, Robb Stark's forces approach the unconquerable rock that may prove all too conquerable without its master's genius. On Dragonstone, Stannis prepares to claim his crown by force of arms. In the Reach, Renly builds an army that dwarfs all others. The outlaws multiply in the chaos, the pirates grow fat on unprotected commerce, and the common folk suffer while their betters wage war with borrowed gold and fading reputations. The tide of war that began with a single arrow beside the Green Fork now threatens to drown the very foundations of the Seven Kingdoms. What started as rebellion against an unpopular king has become something far more dangerous: the complete collapse of the order that held the realm together. Without Tywin Lannister's iron will to impose limits on the conflict, the War of Five Kings spreads like wildfire through a kingdom that grows more combustible with each passing day. The final battles approach, but victory may prove as destructive as defeat for a realm that bleeds gold along with blood. The dawn breaks blood-red over King's Landing as Stannis Baratheon's fleet appears in Blackwater Bay, like a forest of masts and sails. From the walls of the Red Keep, the royal defenders can see 200 war galleys bearing the flaming heart of Aralla alongside the crowned stag of House Baratheon. "How many ships?" Cersei demands, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "More than we can match, Your Grace," reports Sir Jacelyn Bywater, commander of the City Watch. The royal fleet managed to get perhaps 30 ships to sea before they were overwhelmed. King Joffrey stands beside his mother on the battlements, but his usual arrogance has given way to something approaching fear. The sight of so many enemy ships has finally made the danger real to him. "Where is our wildfire?" he asks. "Bring out the wildfire stores and burn them all." Cersei nods desperately. "Send word to the pyromancers. Every jar we have, every ounce of the substance." But the plan that might have succeeded under Tywin's careful direction becomes a disaster without his tactical oversight. The wildfire barges launch too early, their green flames spreading across the water in spectacular displays that consume more friendlies than enemies. Stannis's captains, warned by deserters from the royal fleet, navigate around the worst of the inferno while their siege weapons rain stones and fire arrows into the city's defences. "The walls are breaching," shouts Ser Boros Blount from his position on the ramparts. "They're landing troops at 3 points along the bay." The Battle of King's Landing unfolds with merciless efficiency as Stannis' veterans storm ashore against demoralized defenders. Without Tywin's gold to ensure loyalty, many of the City Watch throw down their weapons rather than die for a dynasty they no longer believe can protect them. Meanwhile, in the throne room, chaos erupts as lords and courtiers realize their situation has become hopeless. "We must surrender," pleads Grand Maester Pycelle. "Perhaps King Stannis will show mercy to those who yield quickly." "Never!" Joffrey's screech echoes off the Iron Throne's twisted metal. "I am the king. They cannot take what is mine by right." "By what right?" The question comes from Sir Barristan Selmy, who enters the throne room with his sword already drawn. "Your claim rests on lies, and everyone knows it now." The confrontation that follows is brief and brutal. Joffrey draws the ornamental sword from his belt, but the boy king's bladework cannot match that of the finest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. Barristan's blade takes him in the heart with surgical precision. "You were never worthy of the crown," the old knight says, as Joffrey dies at the foot of the Iron Throne, his blood pooling among the throne's twisted swords. Cersei's scream of rage and grief fills the hall, but there is no time for mourning. Stannis' soldiers are already fighting their way through the Red Keep's outer defences. Far to the west, the final act of Lannister collapse plays out with equal inevitability. Robb Stark's forces surround Lannisport as the great port city burns under northern assault. The Lannister fleet, caught in harbour without time to escape, surrenders or burns at its moorings. "The city falls to us within the hour," Lord Umber reports to Robb as they watch the siege from a nearby hill. Lord Lefford asks for terms. The same terms we offered at Ashmark, Robb replies. Surrender unconditionally, and we'll spare the civilians. Continue to resist, and we'll treat this as we treated the others. The sack of Lannisport marks the symbolic end of Lannister naval power. The ships that once projected their strength across narrow seas now serve as funeral pyres for an empire built on gold and fear. At Casterly Rock itself, Sir Kevan Lannister makes his last stand with the desperate courage of a man who has nothing left to lose. His 2,000 defenders hold the great castle's battlements against impossible odds, knowing that surrender means the end of everything their house has built. My lord, Sir Darvan approaches his uncle with tears streaming down his face. The outer walls are breached. They'll be in the courtyard within the hour. Kevan nods grimly. He expected this moment from the day his brother died beside that cursed river. Send word to Sir Jaime, he commands. Tell him that Casterly Rock fell fighting. Tell him that House Lannister never surrendered. My lord, Sir Jaime is a prisoner, I know, but he's still a Lannister, and he deserves to know how his family's seat fell. The final assault on Casterly Rock becomes legend for its ferocity and futility. Northern soldiers scale walls built to last 1,000 years, while Lannister defenders fight with the desperation of the doomed. Kevan himself dies, sword in hand, in the castle's great hall, struck down by 3 northern swords as he defends the seat of his ancestors. In his captivity, Jaime Lannister receives word of each disaster as ravens reach Robb Stark's camp. The Kingslayer sits in chains as messengers report the fall of Lannisport, the sack of King's Landing, the death of his nephew, and finally the capture of Casterly Rock. Your family's power ends with these battles, Robb tells him quietly, as they stand together, watching the sun set over the Riverlands. Your father's death began this collapse, but it ends today. Jaime says nothing for a long moment, his green eyes reflecting the dying light. He always said that lions were the kings of beasts, he finally whispers. But even lions can be brought down by wolves if there are enough of them. Your brother Tyrion arrives tomorrow, Robb continues. He was released from the Eyrie when Lady Lysa decided supporting the winning side served her interests better than keeping prisoners. Tyrion. Jaime's laugh is bitter as winter wind. The last lion comes home to find his pride scattered to the winds. The next morning brings Tyrion Lannister to the northern camp, but the reunion with his brother offers no joy. The imp surveys the wreckage of everything he once knew with the detached interest of a man studying historical curiosities. So it's finished then, he says to Robb. House Lannister, the great power of the West, reduced to 2 prisoners and a handful of scattered bannermen. Your house brought this on itself, Robb replies without malice. Your father's reputation was built on fear and gold. When both proved mortal, everything else collapsed. Tyrion nods thoughtfully. And what happens to the last lions now? That depends on how useful you prove to be in the new order. In King's Landing, the transition of power proceeds with surprising smoothness as Stannis Baratheon claims the Iron Throne by right of conquest. The lords who once kowtowed to Joffrey now bend the knee to his uncle with equal enthusiasm, their loyalty flowing toward power as rivers flow toward the sea. The realm has suffered under false kings and corrupt advisers, Stannis proclaims from the Iron Throne, his voice echoing through the great hall. We shall restore law and justice to the 7 kingdoms. Cersei Lannister, captured during the fall of the Red Keep, faces judgment before the man she helped to usurp for so many years. You stand accused of treason, murder, and crimes against the realm, Stannis intones. How do you answer these charges? I regret nothing, she replies, her golden hair dulled by imprisonment, but her green eyes still blazing with defiance. "Everything I did was for my children, for my family. Your children were bastards born of incest. Your family built their power on lies and murder. Justice demands payment for these crimes. The trial is brief, the verdict predetermined. By sunset, Cersei Lannister joins her son in death, her head displayed on the walls of the Red Keep as a warning to all who would challenge the rightful king. As night falls over Westeros, the great powers count their victories and losses. The North has won its independence and proven its military might. The Riverlands are restored to their rightful lords. Stannis sits the Iron Throne with unquestioned authority. But perhaps most significantly, the example of Tywin Lannister's mortality has been written in fire and blood across the continent. The man who seemed untouchable, whose reputation kept rebellions in check through fear alone, died from a single desperate arrow fired by a boy whose name history will never remember. The lesson spreads through every castle and tavern in the realm. No man is so powerful that he cannot fall. No house so mighty that it cannot crumble. No empire so strong that it cannot collapse when its foundation proves to rest on mortal clay rather than eternal stone. The War of Five Kings ends not with negotiated settlements or political marriages, but with the complete destruction of the power that started the conflict. House Lannister's golden age dies with its architect, and from its ashes rises a new order built on very different principles. The lions have lost their claws, and the realm belongs to wolves and stags once more. 3 months after the fall of King's Landing, the Iron Throne sits beneath a very different king as Stannis Baratheon holds court in the Red Keep's great hall. The throne room that once echoed with Joffrey's mad proclamations now rings with the measured tones of lawful judgment and careful deliberation. The realm bleeds from years of war and misrule, Stannis declares to the assembled lords. We shall restore order through law, not through the whims of kings or the weight of gold. Lord Davos Seaworth stands at his right hand, elevated to Hand of the King for his years of loyal service. The former smuggler's rise symbolizes the new order Stannis seeks to establish: merit over birth, loyalty over wealth. Your Grace, Lord Rowan of Goldengrove steps forward, his voice carrying the concerns of many assembled lords. The question of the North remains unresolved. King Robb's forces still occupy much of the Riverlands and Westerlands. Stannis nods grimly. The young wolf's decisive victories have left him in control of nearly a third of Westeros, with an army that proved its superiority against the realm's former strongest house. Bring in the northern delegation, he commands. The great doors open to admit Robb Stark, no longer the boy who left Winterfell months ago, but a proven king in his own right. He enters flanked by Lords Umber and Mormont, with Sir Brynden Tully carrying the direwolf banner behind him. Grey wind pads beside his master, a living reminder of northern power. Your Grace, Robb says, offering a respectful nod, but not the deep bow that would acknowledge Stannis as his overlord. Lord Stark, Stannis replies, deliberately using the title that denies Robb's royal claim. We must discuss the future of the Seven Kingdoms. The future of 6 kingdoms, perhaps, Robb corrects gently. The North has proven its independence on the battlefield. I come to negotiate terms between sovereign rulers, not to bend the knee. The tension in the throne room becomes palpable. Lords who expect Stannis to demand submission watch carefully as the 2 kings take each other's measure. You won your independence through conquest, Stannis acknowledges. But can you hold it? Can you take it? Robb's smile is polite but confident. Your Grace commands the loyalty of the southern kingdoms, but winter comes, and the North knows cold better than any. The negotiations that follow span 3 days, but eventually produce terms that both kings can accept. The North gains formal independence in exchange for trade agreements that benefit both realms. The Riverlands, having fought alongside the North, receive substantial autonomy while remaining technically part of the Seven Kingdoms. Lord Edmure Tully shall serve as Warden of the Riverlands, Stannis announces to the court, with full authority to govern his region as he sees fit, answerable only to the Iron Throne in matters of foreign war and succession. Edmure, freed from Lannister captivity and restored to his rightful place, accepts the position with visible relief. The Riverlands have suffered more than any other region during the war, and their people deserve leaders who understand their needs. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep's dungeons, Tyrion Lannister awaits his own judgment with the sardonic resignation of a man who has seen his world collapse around him. When the guards come for him, he follows them to the throne room with steady steps and a curious mind. Tyrion of House Lannister, Stannis begins, his voice carrying the weight of royal judgment. You stand accused of complicity in your family's crimes against the realm. I stand accused of many things, Tyrion replies dryly. Which specific crimes did you have in mind, Your Grace? Treason against the rightful king, murder and corruption of royal justice. Tyrion considers this carefully. I confess to corruption, Your Grace, though I would argue that justice in King's Landing was already corrupted when I arrived. As for treason and murder, I'm curious which murders you attribute to me specifically. The trial that follows reveals Tyrion's complicated role in his family's regime. While he bears responsibility for serving Lannister interests, testimony from witnesses like Sir Barristan, and even former enemies, portrays him as often the voice of moderation in a court gone mad. Your wit and intelligence are undeniable, Stannis says finally, but you served a false king and enabled his crimes through your silence. Guilty as charged, Your Grace, though I would note that silence was often the only alternative to joining Joffrey's victims. Indeed, which is why your sentence shall be exile rather than execution. You are banished from Westeros for life, but free to make what you will of yourself in the free cities. Tyrion bows deeply. Your Grace is more merciful than I deserve. I accept exile gladly. Jaime Lannister's judgment follows a different path. The Kingslayer enters the throne room in chains, but his military reputation precedes him. Sir Jaime, Stannis begins, your crimes are manifold. Kingslaying, treason, incest, attempted murder of children. By rights, you should die. By rights, many men should die who continue to draw breath, Jaime replies. I make no excuses for what I've done. However, Stannis continues, testimony speaks to your skill as a commander and your protection of innocent lives during the sack of King's Landing years ago. Lord Commander Selmy argues that you could serve the realm in exile rather than serve death in disgrace. The sentence mirrors his brother's, life exile, but with the possibility of redemption through service to foreign princes who might value his tactical expertise. Take the black, Stannis offers as an alternative. Serve the Night's Watch with honor, and your past crimes are forgiven. Jaime considers this for a long moment. The Wall has need of experienced swords? The Wall has need of men who understand duty, even if they learned it late in life. Then I choose the black, Your Grace. The fate of the remaining Lannister children proves less complicated. Prince Tommen and Princess Myrcella, both still young and innocent of their parents' crimes, are removed from the line of succession, but otherwise unharmed. The children shall be fostered by loyal houses, Stannis announces. Away from the corruption of King's Landing, they may yet grow into decent adults. Lord Randall Tarley accepts custody of Tommen, while Lord Paxter Redwyn agrees to foster Myrcella. Both children will be raised with new names and new identities, free from the burden of their family's legacy. The political reconstruction extends beyond individual fates to institutional changes. The faith, long suppressed under Lannister rule, begins to reassert its moral authority under Stannis's more pious regime. The crown has ignored the spiritual needs of the realm for too long, the High Septon declares during a meeting with the king. The people hunger for righteousness, not just bread. "What do you propose?" Stannis asks, genuinely interested in the faith's perspective. "Allow the faith to reform its militant arm, not to wage war against the crown, but to protect pilgrims and fight bandits who prey upon the innocent." The proposal faces resistance from secular lords who remember the faith militants' previous interventions in politics, but Stannis sees potential value in religious authority that supports lawful rule. The faith may recruit and train holy warriors, he decides, but they answer to the crown in all matters of temporal justice. Spiritual crimes are their domain, but temporal crimes belong to royal courts. The compromise satisfies most parties and provides additional security for a realm still recovering from years of warfare. As spring arrives in King's Landing, the immediate crisis of succession has been resolved. Stannis rules with firm but fair authority. The North has achieved its independence. The Riverlands enjoy unprecedented autonomy, and even former enemies have found places in the new order. But the deeper work of reconstruction has only begun. Trade routes must be reopened, harvests must be protected, and the common folk must learn to trust their rulers again. "We've ended one war," Davos observes to his king as they walk the Red Keep's battlements. "But winning the peace may prove more difficult than winning the throne." Stannis nods gravely. "War destroys quickly, but building takes time. We must have patience for the work ahead." In his solar that evening, Stannis receives reports from across his domains. Tax revenues slowly recover as trade resumes. The royal fleet, rebuilt from captured Lannister ships, patrols the narrow sea against pirates and smugglers. Construction begins on roads and bridges destroyed during the fighting. Perhaps most importantly, no new rebellions threaten the realm's stability. With House Lannister broken and the primary claimants settled on their thrones, the great lords focus on rebuilding rather than scheming. The immediate aftermath of revolution has been managed with wisdom and restraint. Justice has been tempered with mercy, punishment balanced with forgiveness, and the realm's wounds begin to heal under competent leadership. But in the north, Robb Stark faces his own challenges of kingship as he transforms from victorious general to peacetime ruler. The independence his people bled to achieve must now be proven sustainable through good governance and careful diplomacy. The Game of Thrones has ended, but the game of kingship has only just begun. And that game, played not on battlefields, but in council chambers and throne rooms, will ultimately determine whether the sacrifices of war have purchased lasting peace or merely a respite before the next cycle of violence begins. 6 months after his coronation, King Stannis Baratheon sits in his solar reviewing ledgers that tell a grim story of royal finances. The numbers spread before him paint a picture of debts that seem to grow like weeds, despite his efforts to impose fiscal discipline on the realm. "The Iron Bank's latest demand," Davos Seaworth says, placing another scroll on the growing pile. 6 million gold dragons, due within the year. Stannis grinds his teeth audibly. Tywin Lannister's management of these debts was the only thing keeping the realm solvent. Without Casterly Rock's gold mines producing revenue, we're borrowing money to pay interest on money we've already borrowed. The lords grow restless about new taxes, Your Grace. They claim the war's end should bring relief, not greater burdens. The lords will pay what the realm requires, or they'll find themselves facing the crown's justice. Stannis' voice carries the iron certainty that has defined his rule. I didn't fight a war to preside over bankruptcy. The financial crisis extends beyond royal coffers to affect every level of society. In the throne room, Stannis hears petitions from merchants whose trade routes remain disrupted, farmers whose fields were burned during the fighting, and craftsmen whose livelihoods depend on royal contracts that the treasury can no longer afford. "Your Grace," pleads Master Tobo of the Armourers' Guild, "the Crown owes our guild 40,000 dragons for weapons and armour supplied during the war. Without payment, we cannot purchase new steel or pay our apprentices." "The Crown's debts will be honoured," Stannis replies, though privately he wonders how. But payment schedules must reflect the realm's current capacity. Meanwhile, in Winterfell's Great Hall, Robb Stark faces his own governing challenges as an independent king. The same military prowess that won him a kingdom now proves inadequate for the complexities of ruling it during peacetime. "The Ironborn grow bold again," reports Theon Greyjoy, whose loyalty to his foster brother has been tested but proven during the war. "Raiders struck fishing villages along the western coast. 3 ships taken, 24 small folk carried off as thralls." Robb studies the map spread before him, noting how vast his kingdom appears when measured in leagues that must be defended rather than conquered. "What forces can we spare from the southern borders?" he asks Lord Karstark. "Few, Your Grace. We need those men to watch for signs that King Stannis might reconsider our independence treaty." The conversation illustrates the fundamental challenge facing the North. Independence requires constant vigilance and resources that strain even their victory-enhanced capabilities. "Send ravens to the coastal lords," Robb decides. "They must strengthen their own defences while we organise a larger response. The Ironborn respect strength, not negotiation." Lady Catelyn, now serving as her son's chief advisor, raises another pressing concern. "The harvest reports from our southern holdings show troubling patterns," she says, unrolling parchments covered with numbers and assessments. "The lands we conquered in the Riverlands and Westerlands require significant investment to recover their productivity. Investment we can afford? Investment we must make, or else our new territories become burdens rather than assets." The reality of governing conquered lands proves more complex than the conquest itself. Northern administrators struggle to understand local customs and traditions, while former Lannister supporters harbour resentments that complicate every decision. In the former Westerlands, now administered by Northern appointees, the integration proceeds with mixed results. Some former Lannister bannermen, like Lord Lefford, adapt quickly to new masters who prove more interested in competent administration than political revenge. "Lord Stark's representatives treat us fairly," Lefford tells his assembled household knights. "They demand taxes and loyalty, but they don't seek to humiliate us or strip our lands." But other lords struggle with the transition. Lord Crake Hall, whose sons died fighting for the Lannisters, finds it difficult to serve former enemies with genuine enthusiasm. "We bend the knee because we must," he confides to his wife. "But I don't pretend to love our new masters. They're conquerors, not rightful lords." These underlying tensions create ongoing administrative challenges as Northern rule seeks legitimacy beyond mere force of arms. In King's Landing, Stannis receives an unexpected delegation from Dorne that creates new diplomatic complications. Prince Oberyn Martell arrives at court with a small but impressive retinue, their presence immediately noticed throughout the capital. "Your Grace," Oberyn says during his formal audience, his voice carrying the musical accent of the southern deserts, "Dorne has waited 20 years for justice regarding the murder of Princess Elia and her children." Justice for crimes committed by men now dead? Stannis's tone is carefully neutral. The mountain still lives. Sir Gregor Clegane still draws breath while Elia's bones rest cold in the Red Keep's crypts. Tywin Lannister protected him, but Tywin Lannister is dead. The request puts Stannis in a difficult position. Gregor Clegane serves as a landed knight in the Westerlands, now technically under Northern administration. Handing him over to Dornish justice might satisfy one ally while creating tensions with another. The matter requires careful consideration, Stannis says finally. Justice must be pursued, but through proper channels and legal procedures. Oberyn's smile is sharp as a blade. Of course, Your Grace. Dorne has waited this long. We can wait a little longer for proper justice. The implied threat in his words is unmistakable, reminding everyone present that Dorne's integration into the realm remains fragile, despite their formal submission. At the Wall, Jaime Lannister begins his new life as a man of the Night's Watch, trading golden armor for black wool and silk pavilions for Spartan quarters. The transition proves more difficult than he anticipated. The Watch has received less support since the war ended, Lord Commander Mormont explains during one of their daily discussions. The Southern Kingdoms focus on rebuilding their own lands rather than supporting our mission. Jaime nods grimly. His exile to the Wall was meant as redemption, but he finds an organization struggling with reduced resources and declining recruitment. How many new brothers have joined this year? Fewer than 30, and half of those are criminals avoiding harsher punishments in the South. The reality troubles Jaime more than he expected. The Night's Watch faces threats beyond the Wall that require experienced commanders and adequate supplies, but both become increasingly difficult to obtain as Southern attention turns elsewhere. In the reconstructed throne room, Stannis holds court while representatives from various regions present their problems and requests for royal assistance. Pirates continue to plague shipping lanes, reports Lord Redwyn. My fleet can protect the Reach's coast, but the narrow sea requires coordinated patrols that strain our resources. Outlaws in the Riverlands prey on merchants, adds a representative from the Brotherhood of Rivermen. The Brotherhood without banners claims to fight for the common folk, but their activities disrupt trade and commerce. Each problem requires resources the Crown can barely afford, creating a cycle where economic recovery depends on stability that costs more than the realm can easily provide. As the day's court session ends, Stannis retreats to his solar with Davos to review the mounting challenges. Victory in war appears simpler than victory in peace, he observes, studying reports from across his kingdom. Dead enemies stay dead, but living subjects require constant attention and resources. The realm needs time to heal, Your Grace. Perhaps we're trying to do too much, too quickly. Time is a luxury we cannot afford. Every day we delay addressing these problems, they grow worse. Stannis moves to the window, overlooking Blackwater Bay, where merchant ships move carefully through waters still patrolled against pirates and smugglers. The Iron Bank will not wait indefinitely for payment. Dorne will not forget their desire for justice. The North will not remain friendly if we cannot maintain our treaty obligations, and the common folk will not support a crown that cannot provide security and prosperity. The litany of challenges illustrates the fundamental reality facing all the war's victors. Winning battles required skills very different from those needed to govern effectively. In Winterfell, Robb faces similar realizations as he reviews reports from across his expanded kingdom. The North's independence brought responsibilities that test his abilities in ways that warfare never did. Perhaps father was right about the burdens of leadership, he tells his mother as they walk through Winterfell's Godswood beneath ancient trees that have witnessed countless generations of Stark rule. Your father faced similar challenges after Robert's rebellion, Catelyn replies. It takes time to transform victory into lasting peace. How much time do we have before our enemies recover their strength or our allies lose patience? The question hangs in the cold northern air without an easy answer, reminding both of them that the price of victory includes responsibilities that may prove as burdensome as the crown itself. The victors in the War of Five Kings have achieved their immediate goals, but governing proves more complex than conquering. Each day brings new challenges that test their abilities to transform military success into stable, prosperous rule. The Game of Thrones may be over, but the game of kingship has revealed rules that even victorious players struggle to master. 5. The royal treasury shows a surplus for the third consecutive year, Davos Seaworth reports, his voice carrying satisfaction that would have seemed impossible during the dark days following the war. The Iron Bank's debt has been reduced by half, and our credit standing improves with each payment. Stannis nods grimly, but even his stern demeanor cannot completely hide his satisfaction. The fiscal discipline he imposed on the realm, initially met with resistance from lords accustomed to royal profligacy, has restored the crown's financial stability. "What news from the north?" he asks, turning to more diplomatic matters. King Robb sends word that trade along the King's Road has increased by 40% this year. The northern lords express satisfaction with our customs agreements. The relationship between the Iron Throne and the independent Kingdom of the North has evolved from wary cooperation to genuine alliance. Trade flows freely across the border, and disputes are resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. In Winterfell, Robb Stark sits in his great hall with his queen, Jane Westerling, whose marriage to the Northern King symbolized the successful integration of former Lannister territories into the new order. Their young son, Eddard, plays at his mother's feet while she reviews correspondence from across the kingdom. Lord Manderley reports that White Harbour's shipyards have launched 12 new trading vessels this season, Jane tells her husband. The Braavosi merchants compete eagerly for northern goods. And our southern holdings? Prospering under northern administration, the former Lannister lands produce more gold and grain than they did under their previous lords. Robb studies reports from across his expanded kingdom with the satisfaction of a ruler who has successfully transformed conquest into prosperity. The Westerland's integration into the north required careful diplomacy and generous terms for former enemies, but the results justify the effort. Schedule a progress through the southern holdings this autumn, he decides. The lords need to see their king regularly, especially those who remember different banners flying over their castles. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea in Pentos, Tyrion Lannister serves as chief advisor to Magister Illyrio, his wit and political acumen valued despite his family's fallen reputation. The exile that once seemed like punishment has become opportunity in the free cities, where competence matters more than bloodlines. Your advice regarding the Volantane trade dispute proved invaluable, Illyrio tells him over breakfast in the Magister's luxurious gardens. The solution you proposed satisfied all parties while increasing profits for our merchant partners. Tyrion raises his cup in a mock toast. The skills one learned surviving Lannister politics translate surprisingly well to commercial negotiation. Do you ever regret the path that brought you here? The question hangs in the morning air as Tyrion considers his response. The fall of his house cost him birthright and homeland, but it also freed him from expectations and grudges that might have killed him eventually. Regret is a luxury I cannot afford, he says finally. Better to make the best of exile than to mourn what cannot be changed. In the Sept of Baelor, the High Septon leads morning prayers for a congregation that includes lords and commoners alike reflecting the faith's renewed influence in the realm. The religious revival that began during the war's chaos has evolved into a stabilizing force that balances secular authority with spiritual guidance. "The Seven bless us with peace and prosperity," he intones, his voice carrying to every corner of the great sept. "Let us remember that earthly kingdoms rise and fall, but righteousness endures forever." After the service, he meets privately with representatives from the faith militant, whose reformed organization has become an accepted part of the realm's security apparatus. "The reports from the Riverlands are encouraging," Septon Marcus tells him. "The outlaws who plagued trade routes have largely been pacified or driven away." And the wall? Brother Gaime's letters speak of improved morale and increased recruitment. The Night's Watch benefits from the realm's stability, even if southern support remains limited. At Castle Black, Jaime Lannister leads a patrol along the wall's battlements, his black cloak whipping in the cold wind that perpetually blows from beyond the ancient fortification. 5 years of service to the Watch has transformed the former Kingslayer into something resembling the honorable knight he once pretended to be. "Any sign of wildling activity?" asks Sam Tarley, who serves as the Watch's new Maester after old Eamon's passing. "None beyond the usual hunting parties," Jaime reports. "The lands beyond the wall remain quiet, though we maintain vigilance. The wall's mission continues despite reduced southern interest, but the stability of the Seven Kingdoms has allowed the Watch to focus on its primary duty rather than political survival." "Do you think the realm has forgotten about us?" Sam asks as they walk. "Perhaps, but forgotten is better than constantly at war. Let the South rebuild while we guard against threats they don't understand." In Dawn, Prince Oberyn Martell sits in the water gardens with his brother Doran, both men content with the justice they finally received when Sir Gregor Clegane faced trial for his crimes. The Mountain's execution helped heal wounds that had festered for decades. "The realm has found a peace that seemed impossible during the war," Doran observes, watching his grandchildren play in the fountains. "Peace built on the grave of the man who made peace impossible," Oberyn replies. "Sometimes I wonder if that northern archer realizes what his arrow accomplished. Does it matter? History remembers results, not intentions." The conversation reflects a truth that echoes throughout the transformed realm. Tywin Lannister's death removed the primary obstacle to resolution of conflicts that might otherwise have continued for generations. In Essos, traders speak of the Westerosi miracle, a kingdom that emerged from devastating civil war stronger and more prosperous than before. The transformation attracts merchants and investors eager to profit from the realm's stability. "The Northern Kingdom produces the finest furs and amber," a Braavosi trader explains to his Pentoshi colleague, while King Stannis's domains offer grain and manufactured goods at competitive prices. And the political situation? Stable as bedrock. The wars that once disrupted commerce are now ancient history. As evening falls over Westeros, the realm's transformation from war-torn chaos to peaceful prosperity seems complete. The lords who once schemed for advantage now focus on trade and development. The small folk who once fled from armies now tend their fields in safety. The ships that once carried soldiers now transport goods between friendly kingdoms. But perhaps the most profound change lies in what the realm has learned about the fragility of power and the unexpected consequences of individual actions. Tywin Lannister's reputation for invincibility was shattered by a single arrow fired by a boy whose name remains unknown to history. That arrow's flight lasted mere seconds, but its impact continues to shape events 5 years later. Without Tywin's military genius, his tactical brilliance, his vast wealth, and his ruthless competence, House Lannister collapsed like a sandcastle before the tide. Without Lannister power to perpetuate the cycle of revenge and rebellion, the realm found paths to peace that had been closed for decades. The lesson echoes through every castle and sept in Westeros. No man is indispensable, no power is permanent, and the mightiest can fall as easily as anyone else. Kings and lords who once ruled through fear and intimidation have learned to govern through law and cooperation. In the quiet of his solar, King Stannis reviews the day's business and contemplates the realm he inherited through an accident of war. Victory came not through superior strategy or overwhelming force, but through an enemy's single moment of mortal vulnerability. "One arrow," he murmurs to himself, studying a map of the 7 kingdoms that shows trade routes instead of battle lines. One arrow changed everything. The randomness of it might trouble a man who believes in order and justice, but Stannis has learned to accept that chaos sometimes serves righteous purposes. Tywin Lannister's death was arbitrary, but its consequences brought law and stability to a realm that had known neither under Lannister rule. As the sun sets over a kingdom at peace, the great lords settle into their castles, secure in their positions, but humbled by the knowledge that fortune can change as quickly as an archer can loose an arrow. The War of 5 Kings has become history, its lessons carved into the collective memory of all who survived it. The realm that emerged from that conflict bears the scars of war, but also the wisdom that comes from surviving chaos and choosing cooperation over continued bloodshed. Trade flourishes where armies once marched. Children play where battles once raged, and former enemies work together to build something better than what came before. The song of ice and fire continues, but it has become a gentler melody, one that speaks of harmony rather than discord, of builders rather than destroyers, of a future that honors the past without being enslaved by it. History will record the War of 5 Kings as a conflict that began with the death of Robert Baratheon and ended with the fall of House Lannister. But those who lived through it understand a deeper truth. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest actions, and the fate of kingdoms can turn on the flight of a single arrow fired in desperate hope by a boy who never knew how much his aim would matter. In the end, that may be the greatest lesson of all.